A deal to end the war in Ukraine will only happen with Kyiv's involvement. That's the message from European leaders ahead of Donald Trump's planned summit with Vladimir Putin. They're worried the two presidents are meeting in Alaska to effectively carve up parts of Ukraine in the name of ending the conflict. But does Europe or Kiev itself have any chance of influencing the peace process? Hello and welcome to Roundtable. I'm Enda Brady. Now, soon after Trump agreed to meet Putin face-to-face, rumours about what's on the table started to surface. The American president has suggested he could agree to an exchange of territory. Trump's already apparently backtracked on demands that Vladimir Zelensky should also be involved in the talks in Alaska. These are worrying signs for Europe and Ukraine, who fear what will be agreed over their heads.
I'm going in to speak to Vladimir Putin, and I'm going to be telling him, you got to end this war, you got to end it.
That's what Trump wants to tell Putin at their meeting in Alaska on Friday. Europe and Zelensky worry what Trump plans to offer Putin in return. The Ukrainian leader has been meeting European leaders all week, including British Prime Minister Keir Starmer at Downing Street on Thursday, to agree a unified position. The stance of EU leaders is that only Ukraine can decide what sacrifices it's willing to make, with their help.
Europeans cannot and must not be mere spectators when it comes to such crucial strategic issues for the future of Europe, and that is why we are working on it.
The reason Europe is sticking to its stance is because Trump has discussed an exchange of territory between Russia and Ukraine as part of any peace deal. It is believed one of Putin's demands is that Kiev surrenders parts of eastern Ukraine that it still controls.
There'll be some land swapping going on. I know that through Russia and through conversations with everybody. To the good, for the good of Ukraine. Good stuff, not bad stuff. Also, some bad stuff, for both.
Zelensky says he will reject any proposal to give up the Donbass region in exchange for a ceasefire, and that in reality Putin is not preparing for peace on the ground.
There is no sign that the Russians have received signals to prepare for a post-war situation, not yet. On the contrary, they are moving their troops and forces in such a way as to launch new offensive operations. If someone is preparing for peace, they're not doing this.
Russia currently controls 19% of Ukrainian territory. Trump says he wants to get prime territory back for Ukraine. But is there any kind of peace deal right now that can appease all sides?
Well, let's bring in our guests. I'm delighted to say joining me in the studio is John Kampfner. John is an author and foreign affairs analyst. In Geneva, we have Gunilla van Hull. She is foreign affairs correspondent at the Swedish daily newspaper Svenska Dagbladet. And in Dublin, in Ireland, we have Lara Marlowe. Lara is a journalist and the author of How Good It Is, I Have No Fear of Dying. That's about life on the front line in Ukraine. And in London, we have Marko Gasic. Marko is an international affairs analyst. You're very welcome to this roundtable. Marko, I'll come to you first. The big concern all week in Europe has been that Europe is not invited to this meeting between President Trump and President Putin. Should Europeans be concerned?
Well, I think Europeans should be concerned with the issue that's germane to all of this, that's crucial for all of this, and that is security. Now, the Europeans have shown no interest in the security of their perceived opponent, the Russians. Hence, we are in this mess in the first place. Lavrov said it before this war began. He said it at the OSCE in December 2021. Essentially, we want peace for all or peace for none. The Europeans, unfortunately, represent the force that wants peace for themselves and Russia in pieces. And that's why they refused to give any guarantees to Russia. And they want to go through a phony negotiation process, which invalidates their presence in Alaska, because they're only there to really spoil the thing and to try and go for a ceasefire, which they can spoil whenever they feel themselves strong enough or get enough American support from some post-Trump president. The problem with the Europeans is they can't stomach a Russia at peace and stable, and that's why Russia has engaged in this aggression against Ukraine.
Well, let's bring Lara in on this. Lara, Marlowe. Let's go to Dublin, Marko. Lara, just come in on this, what you've been hearing there from Marko.
Sorry, Marko, but that's upside down and backwards. I mean, Russia is the aggressor in Ukraine the same way it was the aggressor in Chechnya, in Georgia, in Syria, and Vladimir Putin will not stop unless we stop him.
Gunilla, to you, how worried should European leaders be? You know, there's the Zoom call that they've all been chatting on this week. Europe not really having any say in what's going on in Alaska this week.
I think Europe has a reason to be really worried. They basically left aside. This is a two-man show. It's Trump and Putin. And Europe is left behind, basically, or aside. Trump says, we will call you later when we have talked, Putin and me. And for Europe, I mean, this war is happening in Europe. It's Ukraine that's been invaded, and it's European security long term. And if Europe is not part of deciding how this war could end, it's very strange, because we have to think about our security long term. And if that was said before, if Putin is not stopped in Ukraine, he could continue and go on. And it is actually a big issue for Europe. This is a European question, and that Europe is not even part of this. It's a two-man show. It's just, it's very surprising and really upsetting for many Europeans.
Thanks, Gunilla. John, to you, President Trump has already teased the fact that he believes Ukraine will have to cede some territory. How difficult do you think that will be from a Ukrainian perspective and for President Zelensky to sell to his people?
Well, just the first thing to say, Enda, is just to row back a tiny step. I mean, the area which Europeans, Western Europeans, should be rightly criticized was their failure from 2014 with the first Russian invasion of Donbass, Luhansk, and Crimea, to see not just the dangers to Ukraine, about which they cared not very much at the time, but the dangers for European and Western security, which were acute then. Everybody took their eye off the ball. I'm normally, as you know, based in Berlin. And 2 days before the full-scale invasion in February 2022, I was hearing stuff from Germans and from others saying, oh, we don't believe the American intelligence. After all, we remember Iraq. It's all a bit hysterical. It's not going to happen. And then, hey, presto, it did. I used to be based in Moscow. I know the Soviet, I'm old enough to remember the Soviet Union, and I've interviewed Putin. I've spent 3.5 hours with Putin. That was back in the early 2000s. I wouldn't trust he's a supremely smart guy, fluent, scarily pinpointed in his thinking, obsessed with Russian grievance as a driving force, obsessed with the idea that everybody is out to denude Russia of its rightful place in the world. This country that had great potential is now just a sad kleptocracy based on stolen raw materials. It is a highly dangerous regime, and it is just extraordinarily tragic for Ukraine, for Europe, that Trump has bought into this big man theory with Putin, that even back to his press conference during his first presidency, he bought what Putin was saying to him then, that he hadn't interfered in the American elections that Trump won the first time. And it's a highly, highly dangerous situation now. Ukraine is in danger of being sold down the river, which will be a tragedy for Ukraine. And the alarm bells should be ringing all across Europe.
Thanks, John. Marko, back to you. Talk to me about trust. At this meeting in Alaska, how important is trust when you have the President of the United States and the President of Russia sitting down to hopefully come to some sort of an agreement, a ceasefire, anything. Can they trust each other?
The problem is, as the Russians have worked out, you can't trust anything that's on a piece of paper. If the West signs something, as it says so far, it's ready to sign things now, ceasefires now. But the implication is once the Western powers feel themselves strong enough, they will throw that piece of paper in the nearest dustbin, as they've done so often before, as they did with the Minsk agreements, and then proudly the European leaders trumpeted how they had never intended to follow through on this UN Security Council approved document. The Russians know that pieces of paper signed by Europeans are about as much use as they ever were, which is apparently zero. So the Russians need physical guarantees of their own security. It's not about the Russians being kleptocrats or anything else. It's about the Russians knowing that the superpower that was the US under Biden can't just dump its weapons onto Russia's borders in a threatening way and say, you've got no right to stop us. Well, excuse me, the Russians feel they do have the right to stop you, because it's their borders you're parking your missiles on, and they're not going to be accepting that anytime soon.
Lara, to you, there is a lot of concern in the West that any ceasefire will simply be used by Russia as an opportunity to rebuild, regroup, get the economy moving again, and then go again.
I think that's a very valid concern. Marko mentioned the Minsk Accords. From 2014 until 2022, Vladimir Putin just played the West, in particular Angela Merkel and François Hollande, and then Macron. He just strung them along, and he kept talking and talking, which is exactly what he's doing with Ukraine now, so that he could prolong the war. He never respected a single ceasefire. His modus operandi is always the same. He did this in Georgia as well. He invades a territory. He sets up a phony local leadership of Russian puppets, and then he recognizes that territory as part of Russia. That's what he's done in Ukraine, and that's what he's likely to do in Moldova, in Estonia, in God knows where, perhaps Poland, if we let him continue. So yes, there is a very, very serious problem of trust. That said, the Budapest Memorandum of 1994, under which Ukraine gave up its nuclear weapons, Russia, France, China, and the US were all party to that agreement. And all of those countries promised to guarantee Ukraine's security, and all of them have betrayed Russia more than anyone else, because at least the others didn't invade it, didn't rape, pillage, torture their way through the country and steal children the way the Russians have.
Thanks, Lara. Gunilla, President Zelensky has said this week the end of the war must be fair. What does fair even look like from a Ukrainian perspective right now?
Well, fair from Ukrainian perspective will be to get the land back that Russia has occupied. But I think that is not very realistic, and it's very, very hard for Zelensky right now, because he's going to, according to the constitution, he's not going to give up any land or give back any land that's occupied. But if he doesn't do that, then the United States and Trump will be upset and say, we're not going to give any more military aid, military help. We might even lift part of the sanctions. So then he's losing whatever he does. He has an impossible choice right now. And if he doesn't accept what Putin basically is pushing for right now, I don't really see what he can do. The only possibility is that it will be not ceding land, but saying a ceasefire, meaning a frozen conflict, like in Korea, like between North and South Korea, like in Cyprus, and then push the whole issue for the future to negotiate later, perhaps like in 2014, because for Zelensky to cede land right now, I cannot see that happening. I cannot see that.
Thank you, Gunilla. John, that's a very good point, isn't it? That Zelensky can't win here, can he? I mean, his country is about to be carved up by Putin and Trump.
That's the unpalatable truth. I think if we were all being more self-critical, we would say this truth has been there for us all to see for some time. A lot of it can be blamed on Donald Trump and his curious love affair with Putin, which, by the way, will go far beyond the whatever happens in Ukraine. This is the absolute carving up of spheres of influence among authoritarians, in which I would include Trump. I think Trump would love, and I think it is eminently possible that he will emulate Putin in terms of gerrymandering elections so that he will, stay longer. The idea that anybody submits themselves to proper scrutiny is something that he finds anathema and would love to be more like Putin. But I mean, the writing has been on the wall for Ukraine in terms of not being able to realize its war aims, in terms of, as Gunilla was saying, in terms of getting back all its land for some time. And that's because Europe, and this is where Trump's culpability ends and Europe's begins, Europe has always given Ukraine, and the Biden administration has always given Ukraine just enough to keep going. But it was never anywhere close to pushing the Russians back. And 3.5 years in, there is absolute exhaustion in Ukraine. My Ukrainian friends are split on all of this now. A lot of them are thinking, oh, well, let's just cut and run. Let's end this. And then you ask yourselves, what did all those young Ukrainians die for?
Thanks, John. Marko, to you, I'm curious as to why Vladimir Putin is traveling to Alaska. Russia has made significant gains just this week. By all accounts, Russia is using its meat grinder tactics to great effect. What's in this for Putin going along? Is it the fact that he can go along, talk peace, and then Zelensky in Ukraine won't accept whatever has been carved up, and then he can spin it so that the Ukrainians are made out to be the bad guys yet again? Is that what's Putin's thinking here?
Well, one reason why he's going to Alaska, to his neighbor, the USA, is to show that it is a dispute between the two world superpowers and not a dispute regarding Ukraine. Ukraine is simply a proxy which surrendered its sovereignty to NATO, which surrendered the neutrality, which was the basis of the Budapest Memorandum, whereby Ukraine would be neutral forever, and then there's no threat to anyone forever. Once it surrendered that neutrality and sovereignty to NATO, Ukraine just became a proxy. This is a war, a conflict and a near war between two world superpowers, and their meeting in Alaska shows that's where the power is, that Europe does not have the power. Europe just has ill will. It doesn't have the power to enforce it. And that's the reality that we're in.
Thanks, Marko. Lara, just come in on that phrase. Europe doesn't have the power. Europe has ill will. I mean, something needs to give in this conflict, doesn't it?
Europe has the power if it will use it. There's a joke that they tell in Kyiv, which is, how can it be that 500 million Europeans are expecting 350 million Americans to protect them from 150 million Russians who are being held at bay by 40 million Ukrainians? So there's an upside down pyramid here. Europe has, combined, has more than enough wealth and men to stand up to Russia, but they haven't had the unity yet to do that. We thought we saw the premises of something happening back in January, February, when Keir Starmer and Emmanuel Macron promised to send troops to Ukraine, and then they just forgot about it. They didn't do it. Now they're upset because they're being excluded from this process, which absolutely concerns them. It concerns the fate of Europe. But they've got to get their act together. And as John was saying, they haven't provided enough weapons to Ukraine. They haven't even got their military industry up and running as they should. So it's really a moment of truth for Europe. And I'm not sure, and they've all been cosseting Trump and playing up to Trump and calling him daddy, as Mark Rutte said, which is not the way to stand up to this wannabe autocrat. So I'm really hoping that the Europeans will make a strong stand and say this is just not acceptable. I think the Ukrainians have accepted for a long time that they're losing Crimea, that they will not get the 20% of their country that is occupied by Russia back for the foreseeable future. But what is really outrageous about the present so-called peace plan, and I have to put quotation marks on that, is that Russia is demanding that they give up even more land that Russia has not yet conquered and might not conquer. And this is and the other things that you asked, what was an acceptable peace for Ukraine? Remember, there are supposed to be war crimes trials. Putin is indicted as a war criminal. There are supposed to be reparations. And what Trump seems to be proposing, we'll see on Friday, but what he seems to be proposing is that Russia not only keeps all the land it's already got, it gets some extra, all of Donbass, and we forget about sanctions, war crimes trials, reparations. That just all falls by the wayside, and it's not a just peace. And if that's what Trump and Putin try to impose, it cannot last.
Thanks, Lara. Gunilla, to you, if there is a ceasefire this weekend or next week, how close are we to seeing President Trump get what he covets, which is a Nobel Peace Prize?
Yeah, that's what he claims that he would like, that he deserves, and he's comparing himself. He is the brain behind the peace talks between Pakistan and India, and between Azerbaijan and Armenia, and so forth. I don't think we are close to any peace prize to Donald Trump. I don't think, unfortunately, we're close to any end of this war. There might be a ceasefire that will last for a little bit, but don't forget that right now, according to Ukrainian sources, Russian soldiers are mobilizing and building up along the border in eastern Ukraine. It seems like they want to make more offensives, take more land. We are only in August, September, it's fighting months. So I don't think we are any close to the end of this war, and I don't think that Trump can be any closer to a Nobel Peace Prize right now or even in the near future.
Thanks, Gunilla. John, do you think there's a danger President Trump has underestimated President Putin's thoughts over the years, what he has said about Ukraine? He's on record as telling George W. Bush in 2008 that he does not believe Ukraine is a country. Do you think there's a danger that Trump just hasn't understood Putin's thinking?
I was invited as part of a delegation back in 2004 to see Putin. It was late one evening. It lasted 3.5 hours. In contrast to Yeltsin, there was no vodka, there was only tea. It was deadly serious. I asked him the first question. He did an extremely cogent exegesis of Russian grievance. It was brilliantly fluent. It was in Russian. It was then sequentially translated into English, but it was really interesting. The translator wasn't very good, and Putin, having always pretended he doesn't speak English, picked him up very well on it. And I remember writing about it at some length because it was the real wake-up call. This is the Putin that always was, the KGB agent, rather than the Putin who had invited Tony Blair to the Mariinsky ballet and who was sort of cozying up to the West very briefly in his first year or two, just after 2000. And I remember Jack Straw, the British Foreign Secretary, inviting me in and saying, "What's going on here?" And I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "This isn't the stuff that we're getting from our ambassador, and it's not the stuff that Western countries are generally getting." And I said, "Well, I'm just telling you as I saw it." And a few years later came Putin's infamous speech to the Munich Security Conference, in which he basically said, "We've had enough of you guys," and all the usual things around, "We've given you this and we've given you that, and what have you given back in return?" The usual grievance trope that is the standard fare of not very bright Russians and not very bright apologists for Putin as well. And it is absolutely, to me, clear as night follows day that the only purpose Putin has in consolidating his power in a Russian economy that has survived sanctions. But if you think of its incredible potential, science and technology back in the 1990s, and how nothing has come of any of that, and it's as close to economically failing state in terms of its original potential as you could find. The only thing that is keeping him going is grievance and this whole idea of re-establishing Soviet space. And if he stops doing that, he loses the authority to govern, because the people behind him, the security group, the security state will no longer support him. So this is just the start, and Ukraine is just the start. And Trump is a real estate guy. Trump would love to have done a deal with Kim Jong-un. He was close to it. He wants to work with Putin in the Arctic. He would love to build golf courses in Gaza. This is what Trump wants, and Putin will help him deliver it.
Thank you, John. Marko, to you, just final point. Your prediction, are we likely to see a ceasefire next week?
No, we're not. I don't think we are, because it's obvious that that's the plan. The idea is to stop Russia while there's a rearming going on the Ukrainian side, that the West is simply in destroy Russia mode. And that was the reason why this war began in the beginning. These things that are referred to as Russian grievances, I mean, that's the Russians were airing these grievances for 20 years before they acted, when they finally saw that there was no way out of it, that the Ukraine had been co-opted into the Western war of aggression against Russia. And that's when things started, and they're not going to end if we have this permanent assumption that Ukraine has some kind of choice now in a war that it's lost, that its backers have lost. Then you will only encourage further Russia basically is prepared to accept an independent Ukraine, but not to trust it.
Lara, Marlowe in Dublin, thank you. Gunilla van Hall in Geneva, and Marko Gasic in London. John Kampfner here in the studio with me, thank you. Remember, you can see more discussion and debate on our YouTube channel. Just search for Roundtable TRT World. But for now, from me, Enda Brady, and all the team here, goodbye, and thank you for watching.